He was just standing there, calm, quiet, waiting for his coffee. But Officer Daniels, a black man in a suit outside a corporate building, looked suspicious. "You don't belong here," the officer barked. The man, Andre Lewis, barely blinked. "I work here," he said softly. But the officer wasn't hearing it. Within seconds, Andre was in cuffs, face pressed against the hood of a patrol car, surrounded by gawking onlookers filming every second. "Name?" the officer demanded. Andre stayed silent. "Oh, tough guy, huh? You think that suit makes you important?" The cop sneered. He reached into Andre's jacket pocket to check for ID and froze. In his hand was a badge, a gold one. The letters gleamed under the sun. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The officer's face turned pale. Andre finally spoke. "You just assaulted a federal agent. Cameras caught everything. The panic, the humiliation. By the next morning, that same officer was suspended, and Andre was standing before the media, not in handcuffs, but a podium, announcing new federal investigation into police misconduct. Sometimes the people they try to humiliate are the ones sent to bring justice." Moral. Respect isn't about the uniform you wear. It's about the humanity you show. He sat in the small, cold room across from the officer who had humiliated him just days ago. The same man who had shoved him against a car, calling him a trespasser. Now, the officer sat sweating, avoiding eye contact. The department called it a misunderstanding, hoping it would all blow over. But Andre wasn't here for apologies. He was here for accountability. "Agent Lewis," the police chief began carefully, "we'd appreciate your discretion in this matter." Andre leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. "Discretion? You handcuffed a man who did nothing wrong, because you assumed he didn't belong. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern." He slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were photos, reports, complaints, all from other black men who'd faced the same officer. The room went quiet. Andre looked him in the eye. "You thought you could embarrass me, but what you did was expose your department." Days later, Officer Daniels' badge was gone, and the precinct was placed under federal investigation. The man they once called a trespasser was now the one enforcing justice. Moral: never underestimate the quiet ones. They might be the storm that brings your reckoning. Andre stood outside the precinct days later, watching news cameras swarm the entrance. The same building that once cuffed him now stood under federal lock and key. Officers hurried inside, whispering his name like it carried weight. And it did. He wasn't just another man in a suit anymore. He was the agent who turned their system upside down. Reporters called out, "Agent Lewis, what made you take this case so personally?" Andre paused, his voice steady. "Because I know what it's like to be judged before being heard. And I won't stop until that ends, for everyone." Inside, Officer Daniels packed his things, shame heavy in his eyes. He muttered, "I didn't know who you were." Andre turned to him, his tone quiet but firm. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to." Word spread fast. Departments across the city began retraining officers, reviewing old cases, and reopening files that were once ignored. Andre's investigation had become a movement. The man they mocked for trespassing had forced the system to finally open its doors to justice. Moral: power means nothing if it can't humble itself before the truth. Weeks passed, but the shockwaves of Andre's investigation were only growing. Protests turned into rallies, and rallies turned into reforms. For the first time in years, people felt seen. But behind the change, not everyone was happy. Some officers whispered that Andre was making them look bad. One night, he found his car keyed, a note on the windshield that read, "Go back where you belong." He stared at it for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "This is exactly why I'm here," he whispered. The next morning, he walked straight into a press conference. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his voice calm but unwavering. "Justice isn't revenge," he said. "It's accountability. And no badge, mine included, is above that." Even the chief, once defensive, stood beside him now, forced to face the truth. The officer who once tried to silence Andre had become a symbol of everything broken in the system, and Andre, the man they tried to humiliate, became the one leading its repair. By the end of the month, the city council voted to create a new oversight division, headed by none other than Agent Andre Lewis. Moral: when they try to break your dignity, build something stronger with the pieces. They'll have no choice but to stand on what you built. Months later, Andre sat in his new office overlooking the city. The same streets where he'd once been handcuffed now stretched below him. Quiet, watchful, changed. On his desk sat a framed photo of his late father, a man who'd once told him, "Son, one day they'll see you for who you really are. Don't give up before they do." He hadn't. A knock came at the door. It was Officer Daniels. No badge, no arrogance, just a man trying to make peace. "Agent Lewis," he said softly, "I wanted to apologize. I was wrong." Andre studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You were, but if you've learned something from it, maybe it wasn't for nothing." Daniels lowered his eyes, ashamed yet relieved. As he turned to leave, Andre added, "The next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, remember this moment, because one mistake almost cost you your career, but it cost others their lives." Outside, reporters still called Andre's case the wake-up the city needed. But to him, it wasn't about headlines. It was about healing a wound too many had ignored. He stood by the window, whispering to himself, "Justice isn't a job, it's a promise." Moral: real power isn't about control. It's about the courage to do what's right, even after the world gets it wrong. A year later, the city was different. The protests had quieted, not because people stopped caring, but because change had finally begun. Andre walked to the same plaza where it all started, the place where he'd been handcuffed for trespassing. Now, a bronze plaque stood there, engraved with the words, "Justice begins where prejudice ends." An older woman approached him, tears in her eyes. "My son used to be scared of the police," she said softly, "but now he says he wants to be like you." Andre smiled, humbled. "Then I've done my job," he replied. Moments later, a group of new recruits passed by in fresh uniforms. Their training manual bore his name, the Lewis Initiative, Ethical Policing and Equality in Enforcement. Officer Daniels, now volunteering with community programs, raised a hand in quiet respect. Andre nodded back. No anger, no bitterness, just closure. He looked up at the courthouse steps, remembering that day. Humiliation turned into purpose. Pain turned into power. The man they once called a suspect had become the standard. Andre whispered, "Maybe that arrest wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning." Hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that matter. And let's keep the conversation going.